Regardless resident status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere. To keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on Bentham Vision.
Good morning and thank you for joining on this beautiful Monday morning. My name is Tunde Alabi. It's a pleasure to have you join us on this show, Dialogue in Diaspora, where we take a look at issues around the United Kingdom and of course around the world. Like we said, this is a program that gives you the link between the UK and the rest of the world. This morning we're taking a look at the crisis that people have been talking about in the couple of almost a week plus now, the Carillion crisis, the crash that happened, and actually probably will be leaving about 20,000 people now out of job. That is the issue of outsourcing public services to private companies. What danger do they pose, if they do pose any danger at all? And we're looking at this from the Carillion crisis. I'm now joined by Godwin Okri. Godwin Okri, he's a property investment strategist and an Ashburn Older politician analyst. Godwin, thank you for joining us this beautiful Monday morning. Thank you for your time and thank you for taking your time out with us. Ashburn, thank you for your time with us this morning. Let me start with you, Godwin. The issue about Carillion is no longer news, but the effect of the company going bust will linger for a very long time to come. Would you assess the situation?
Well, it's rather unfortunate that Carillion has gone into collapse. It's most certainly clear that everybody in the UK will be affected in some way. The NHS, because you remember that Carillion is involved in building 2 hospitals, one in Liverpool for about 335 million and one in Birmingham for about 350 million. And we're supposed to create 683 new beds. That's going to go. And so the NHS will suffer. Carillion also take part in school meals. Now, God knows what's going to happen there. So school children would suffer. They've got about 19,500 staff who will be made redundant by reason of the liquidation rules. They would also suffer. So it's a sad situation right now. So it most certainly would linger, as you say.
Ashburn.
Yes, I agree with what you said. I mean, it is a global investment company. It's a multi-organization. And my concern is that the employment for the lowest sort of level people, for example, if you look at sort of the porters, the cleaners, etc. So these are the people I'm really concerned about, because sort of the middle of the road, or the shareholders, they have made their money. And my concern is what's going to happen to the employees. Yeah, that's my main concern.
Let's look at how Carillion did not just go bust overnight. The warnings have been there. There have been warnings that the profit margin will be going down, but government kept giving this company contracts. Godwin, would it be in the best interests of government to outsource public services to private companies?
Well, you know what my position is. The failure of Carillion is not a failure of privatization. It's not a failure of the free market. It's not. Nor is it a failure of capitalism. It's not. It's just a failure of a company improperly run that went bust. So one has to be careful that this is not blown out of proportion. It is not a danger of an ideological concept of capitalism. It's not. So that's where I stand.
Well, what does it benefit the taxpayers in the UK when some of these services can actually be handled by government staff and department itself? Why outsource them when they can be handled by people being paid the money by public?
Well, my argument is there are certain services that is best done in the private sector because they have the marginal cost will be reduced because the private sector actively is trying to make a profit. So they reduce the cost and they transfer that reduced cost to the taxpayer. So there's a cost savings.
But report said the value at which government gives out the contract to Carillion is several hundred millions above how this will have been handled.
I'm not sure what report you're looking at, but if you look at the way procurement rules apply in the UK, you will find that the civil servant would look at the bid, and the lowest bid gets the contract, you see. So that's primarily my point.
Okay, we'll come back to this. Let's go on a short break now. When we come back from this break, I've got Ashburn in the house, and I'm going to take some questions from him.
Regardless resident status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on Ben Television.
All right, you're welcome back. See, I have Godwin Okri in the house and Ashburn Older. Ashburn, looking at what has happened to Carillion, would you say it is appropriate for government when there are public institutions, departments that can handle some of the services outsourced to Carillion? Would you say it's appropriate?
Of course it is. Godwin made a point where he said that sort of companies are there to bid, or private companies are there to bid to get the lowest or provide the lowest sort of form of services, not in the form of services, to get the contract so that they can provide a service. So if they bid against each other, the one that sort of provide this sort of the cheapest form of service, the government will go for. And that's exactly what he just said. So that's what the government went for. They went for this particular company. And this particular company has actually run the services that we all needed into the ground. They sort of got wages cut. They paid the workers low wages. They got nurses work longer hours than they should do, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the same work that the private sector can do, a private company decided can do it better. But it's proven that they cannot. So therefore, we need to renegotiate this contract and bring this contract back into the public service. And the public service can do the same work better than these private companies. And what the government has done, it's such a vast company that Carillion has taken over of what it can manage. Whereas there's local private companies or local companies that can take on the sort of work they're doing and provide a better service. So yes, I agree. It should be brought back into the public service. And then it should be managed and monitored exactly like the private companies are doing. There's no difference. All it's simply doing is these private companies are making a hell of a lot of money and keeping us poor. Simple as that, really.
The ultimate aim of every private company is to make profits. Does that, is profit making, should that be what should be considered by any government in anything when the public handles a project? They probably do it in the interest of the public. But when you give it out to the private, they do it for profit. Would you say, well, the profit eventually goes back to the public at the end of the day because they're going to probably have staff that are going to be better paid? But will that be a key interest?
Well, it's much better to have this government contracts, because the government is there to provide a service, and it's a service for all of us. That's a must, and that's a need. So therefore, yes, it should be brought back into the public domain, and by bringing it back into the public domain, we can have a fair and just sort of work agreements between staff and government. private investors are simply there to make money. As simple as that. There's nothing else. They are there. It's basically supply and demand. They are there to maximize profit, and the workers, basically, what's there for the workers? The workers get the smaller bit. They are left on the shelf, and these big guys makes a hell of a lot of money. So, publicize back into the public, bring the contracts back into the public. The public then can manage that and give us a fair and just sort of working conditions. And also we can take as much as we want. We need to reinvest back into the organization. Whereas the private companies don't do that. They just simply rip the profit, pay the shareholders, and to hell with the rest of us.
Godwin.
Well, Ashburn, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Look, we're talking about public functions that could be performed properly by the private service. Now, if you look at simple economics, you'll find that over the years, private companies have been able to use scarce resources more effectively, because primarily their aim is to reduce cost, because by reducing cost, your margin of profit is higher. So your question really doesn't quite address the point. The point is, of the two bodies, the public and the private, who could do the job more efficiently?
The public.
More effectively,
Public.
and using scarce resources.
Are you saying there are no...
And I argue that the private service could do that.
better than the public service?
Absolutely. Because if you go back throughout history, if you look throughout history, when we've put this in the public service, it's failed. And that's why Margaret Thatcher saw it necessary to privatize what ought to be performed by the private companies. It's just simple economics.
That's not
you
true.
Cannot.
That's not true. Because when we had the public...
I'm sorry, can I just allow...
apologize.
You're free, guys, but I just allow Gordon to finish. Go on, Gordon.
Yeah. I mean, if you look... I mean, Margaret Thatcher was right. The basic concept of economics is to say, it is not to say that certain jobs cannot be performed in the public sector, but there are certain things which the private sector are apt to do. Supply of, let's look at Carillion, for example. They maintain 50 prisons. That's private sector. They maintain 5,000 homes for the military. That's supposed to be performed by the private sector. They're building the...
So what should the military themselves be doing? The prisons, what are the Her Majesty's officers doing that they can maintain the prisons?
Well, looking at caring for the prisoners is the function of the public sector. But the running of the prison, cleaning services, protecting services, all of that is the private sector, because it needs the private sector to be able to do that. It's not a public sector job. So in your mind, you have to separate.
Would it be wrong for Her Majesty's prisons to have a cleaning department or cleaning unit where they employ people, put them on public pay, and they have a supervisor?
Well, Tunde, the question is, right or wrong is not the question. It's which is the most efficient way. It's pure economics. You ask yourself economic question. Which is the more efficient way to manage scarce resources? Right or wrong is not the question. Efficiency is. And the most efficient way, I would argue, to run the services is in the private sector. So how else would you do it?
Good. Okay.
Can I just interject? Why do you need the private sector to run a service that anybody can do, any company can do? We don't need a private sector to do that. Any small businesses can run a cleaning company.
But that's still in the hand of the private. That's still in the hand of the private sector.
Okay, it's in the private sector. But what you're saying is that sort of we got to have private sectors to provide that service. But governments, in fact, all services, if you look at it, it's sort of, you can say it's running private. If I run my business, it is private, it's not government. But we're talking about national service. We're talking about the NHS. That's a national service, should be in the hands of the public. We're looking at prisons should be in the hands of the public.
Security at the airport.
Absolutely. Why do we need to have that privately? We can do that just as efficient as a private company.
Well, good question, but I'll answer it. when you define a public sector, you've got to be clear in your mind what you're talking about. If we're talking about the armed forces, that's a private sector work. If we're talking about
Armed
cleaning
forces.
the armed forces, you know, security, armed forces, going to war and all of that, that's a public sector matter. But if we're talking about, but if we're talking about cleaning services, building of roads, building of hospitals, that most certainly is a private sector function.
But aren't there engineering or mechanical, electrical, or certain part of departments in the public service where these can be done?
Well, the question is, they're there, but which of the sector could do it more efficiently?
When
is
it
an
comes to
economic
efficiency,
question.
what will be the running goal of that private sector?
The running goal of a private sector is to reduce cost, because by reducing cost, you're improving your profit. In the public sector, they have no goal. Private sector is we have to make a profit.
Would that be right, Ashburn?
No,
In
certainly.
public sector, no goal.
In public sector, I disagree with that. Public sector do exactly the same thing as a private company. There's no difference at all. It's exactly the same thing, except it's public. So what's the difference with public and private? Just simply to make capitalists, as you said, to make money. That's all it simply is. No other reason. What's the other reason?
I'll answer it. In the public sector, the government, through taxation, creates funds. In the private sector, they go into the private market. And so they have an eye on cost.
It's our tax money that sort of private that gives you the contract. So what you actually
And that's been the line of argument between the both parties in the parliament that we saw in the news. And Jeremy Corbyn say, look, you know this government is going bust. I mean, this company is going bust, and you keep pumping public money into that government.
They give
to that company that is going bust.
It's going bust.
But when you got to understand that the failure of Carillion is not a failure of capitalism, you've got to make that very clear in your mind. The failure of a company, Carillion is not too big to fail. And it failed. And it's very great that the government did
not. It's not too big.
That's your word. It's not too big to fail.
Too big to fail.
Which one is it? Which one is it?
Look. If you look the phrase that we've borrowed from America, there is no company that is too big to fail. If Carillion is big and it fails, it fails. And all the resources will just be moved to a more efficient company that could run it efficiently. So the
But we should have done that in the first place.
Well, it's failed. So the failure of Carillion is not a failure of the free market, nor is it a failure of the ideology of privatization. It never is. It's just that that company failed. It was badly run. That's all it is.
So what should government be doing what should be the role of the government?
Role of the government.
In development, in growth, construction.
In political economy, the role of the government is security of the nation, taxation of the nation, and you need a small government, because a big government would affect the growth of a nation. You need a very small government. You know, neoclassical economists present the argument so clearly.
Is that a socialist point of view or capitalism point of view?
I don't care whether it's socialist or capitalist. It's what runs.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've got to put on break. Ashburn, I'm going to come to you. We need to go on short break. Now, when we come back, we'll continue the discussion. Don't go away.
Regardless resident status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on Bentham Vision. Window to Africa development. Here, live on Bentham Vision.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Dialogue in Diaspora Live. We're still talking about outsourcing public services to private companies in the wake of the collapse of Carillion. Ashburn, from what Golden has said, will it not be right to say, indeed, government doesn't have business in business?
Well, that's true what Godwin has said. I agree to a certain level to what he said. But at the end of the day, when we talk about national service is to cater for everyone. And if we're going to have a service that's that's one particular body capitalize and the rest doesn't, we have inequality. And when we have inequality, we have poverty. We have too much poverty in this country. I mean, we're a rich country, and yet there's poverty everywhere you turn. That's not acceptable because the capitalist privatized companies are just capitalizing and making money for themselves. So we have inequality due to privatization. Now, if privatization was there to cater for everybody, where we have a fair economy, then therefore we all would benefit. But it seems it's not working because if it doesn't work, the company just went down. So it proves that privatize doesn't work. So let's go back to the public sector. Let's be fair. Let's invest back in the public sector so we all can share the commons.
Earlier on, I asked him, I mean, if he was of the opinion that, look, private companies are better suited to handle certain public projects, then I asked him what would be the functions of government. And he tried to give a definition. And I said, would that be a capitalist definition or socialist definition? In your view, what should be the role of government or the functions of government in all this?
The goal of government is to be socialist, to provide for its people, for the people, by the people. That's what government.
Of course, isn't that democracy?
That's what that is what democracy is about, and that's what government is supposed to do. But it seems the Conservative Party, as we know, is for the financial is basically for business structure, and that's what they cater in capitalism. And capitalism has proven it hasn't worked. If you go to Karl Marx said it. Capitalism doesn't work. Henry George actually said capitalism doesn't work. We should have a single taxation. All these great philosophers in the past, 100 years ago, has predicted that. And he said it's not working. So we need to review the system.
But the world has actually moved further and further into capitalism and into globalization. Why?
It doesn't seem to work.
That's what God wants. If in his own assessment, the world is moving towards what is not working, why is the world moving towards what is not working? Well, everything is now globalized. Everything, I mean, profit seems to be the determinant factor in government, in business now.
Well, one has to be careful when you hear when people use the word not working. I'm not sure what not working means. If capitalism have extended its tentacles and we're now in globalization, you borrowing your phrase, that shows that there is an infection of capitalism. And human beings naturally would rescind if something is not to their benefit. So the fact that we have globalization is complete evidence that
would that not be a reason why poverty has also been on the increase? Let me put on hold. I've got Akim on the line. Do I say I have Akim on the line? Good morning, Akim.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us today. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from London.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My question is simple. My contribution is simply that it is not that privatization is better than. I'm calling from London. My simple contribution is this: it's not that public sector is it cannot run a company better than private sector. It can. We have seen a lot of examples around the world. But this ideological battle between public sector and private sector has been, dominated. The school textbook these days that you hardly hear about public sector going business anymore. For instance, the most efficient public sector in the world is as opposed in what's called South Korea. They run steel companies and they are still running better. And yet, we keep hearing about private sector. And if private sector can allocate capital better, why did not in England and America find high-speed rail trains as opposed to those companies that are private nationalized, like France and Germany?
Akim. All right. Thank you so much for that contribution and those examples you gave us. Go on, Ashburn.
If you notice what the Conservative has been doing over the past years, what they've been doing, all the private sector company that's doing extremely well, that the balance sheet is great, they're really escalating, business is great, growth is great. What did the Conservative Party do? They sell it for privatization. Simple as that, really. So therefore, they're taking away what is ours and what we have built over the years and privatize it and say, well, hang on, you know, it's not doing well. Yet they know they don't sell the one that sort of is not doing so well. They sell all the good ones, the post office, all the good companies that's doing well, they sell it off.
I'm not sure the post office is sold off, but my argument is simply
Or
this.
the best part of the post
Can
office.
we look at what Akim said? Akim said, look, if we say private sector is doing better, what about what we're getting from the rail companies? From the moment services were outsourced or have been outsourced to the rail companies, we keep having this failure, and every day, every year, people pay more. And I give an example of South Korea where the services are practically done by those in the public sector, and other countries.
All right, look, different countries have different cultures.
Let's stay in the UK.
Different cultures.
Take the rail case.
Well, you took me to South Korea.
Okay.
But I want to remain in the UK. I'd like to remain in the UK.
Okay, go on as well.
And in the UK, we have to think about the private sector because they are able to run a service more efficiently.
Are you getting a good service, an efficient service, a better service from the rail companies?
From the rail companies?
Yeah.
Well, some delays, but yes, of course. But yes, of course. I mean, it's worse in the private sector. It would have been worse in the public sector. But of course, we are getting it in the private sector. And if you look at...
So are you happy with the increment you pay annually with the service you get?
Well, if inflation goes up, then private companies have to look at the profit and increase the price for the product. So if you want inflation to be controlled, we speak to the Treasury, they look at interest rate. Now interest rate has gone up to 0.5, isn't it, at the moment? So it's relatively low. And so the standard of living is better than it used to be in the UK. And that's made possible because of the proliferation of the private sector. Small businesses, local businesses are growing. I mean, for example, employment rate has dropped tremendously. It's the lowest it's been, unemployment at the moment. So it tells you that capitalism works. And that's the example you need to look at. Why do
we see our poverty pervading everywhere? If capitalism and globalization that thrive on profit, they work for the people, why do we have poverty more now around the world?
I'm not sure
even in advanced country, in the US, in the UK, people are getting poorer.
You're always going to have poverty around us. You know, you can't get rid of it. Even
when it increases, shouldn't that be a concern?
Well, I'm not sure. What are the numbers? I'm not sure what the numbers are. So unless you have numbers in front of me, I cannot say if it's increased.
Is it not clear that more people now go to the food bank than 10 years ago?
That may be, but the population has increased. Our population has increased, and you're going to find a corresponding increase in the number of poverty level. But in proportion, it has dropped. The economy is better than it's been in 10, 15 years. Base rate is 0.550, the lowest it's been. If you look at the value of residential properties right now, the total value of residential property right now is 8 billion, which is the size of the Japanese economy. There is prosperity in England. Let's get that absolutely clear. And the numbers makes it very clear. I am not saying there's no problem. There is problem, but moving things to the public sector would not solve that problem. That's my argument.
Can I just sort of refer to what you just said? That standard of living has increased. So you said the economy has improved. The economy has improved, but people are still in poverty. People are trapped because of usury, because of debt. People have, you see these huge buildings, and you see, or you go to your local town centre and you see these massive buildings growing up, and yet you find it's been occupied, but the people that's living in these occupants, are they really better off? They're trapped in poverty because, let me just finish my point, they're in debt. And if they're in debt, are you really, as your standard of living has really increased?
Well, give me some numbers. Well, unless you give me numbers, because the numbers coming out of the Office for National Statistics indicate that the economy is growing.
Yeah, the economy might be growing,
yes.
but numbers also show that more people are in poverty, more people go to food bank, that more people struggle on a daily
I
basis.
disagree. I disagree.
If you figures, if you give you statistics and you give percentage, you know, percentage really doesn't give you a clear picture of the numbers of people unemployed or people that sort of in debt or people that sort of
I
struggling.
think you'll find that
so
percentages
percentage doesn't give you the actual, what we want is actual numbers. If the government can give you actual figures and numbers, say 100,000, 300,000, but if you give percentage could be anything, couldn't it? A percentage could be, I do a survey and I say I sent out 100 sort of...
Well, if you could give me numbers that the number of poverty has gone up, give me actual numbers, then but that's my point. But I've just told you
I can provide numbers, but I haven't got numbers. I didn't come here to provide them. However, when you said, your statement said that there is you got a better standard of living, you got people that's living, prosperity has moved, but prosperity has moved for the rich, the richer level, not the middle class. In fact, the middle class society is fading away. And what you find, the so-called middle class, is more in debt than anything else.
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I can't have a conversation where you speak in general terms without figures.
But don't you get these around you? Don't you get these around you that more people go to food bank than 2 years ago? Do you not get this going around you that more people, the cost of living is getting higher than wages?
Well, let's deal with
what people earn.
Should we deal with the cost of living?
What people earn, it's not enough to keep them going. What does that mean? Poverty.
The cost of living. The cost of living has dropped because the cost of living in economic terms, you look at the actual standard of living. Inflation has dropped. Inflation is...
I'm sorry, we need to go on a short break now. Then when we come back from that break, we'll start from the issue of standard of living and cost of living. Yeah. We'll be back.
Regardless resident status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on Ben Television. Regardless resident status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world.
All right, welcome back. And as you have joining me in the studio, Godwin Okrio, property investment strategist, and of course, Ashburn Older, a politician, a member of the Lib Dem, and of course, a social analyst. In the studio, we're looking at Carillion and the danger in outsourcing, if there is any at all, public services to private sector. Ashburn, I mean, before we went on that break, we were talking about cost of living, standard of living. In your view, in his own view, in Godwin's view, he is of the opinion that cost of living is dropping. Standard of living is getting better.
Correct.
Would that be true?
I tend to agree. I tend to disagree with that. Yes, there's some truth in that, but I totally disagree. If you take the average person that's got a mortgage, average person, just one person has got a mortgage, and that person's got the day-to-day running of life. So they got a mortgage to pay, they got to supply themselves with traveling to go to work, they've got other expenses, etc., etc. So how could you say standard has gone up? It's still the same. So if we go back 50 years, today it's exactly the same thing. Yes, you've got the big television, yes, you've got the big car, but has it really improved? It's still the same. Nothing has actually, you haven't achieved anything, except for materialistic, it's there, but you're still in debt. And if you're in debt, then are you really better off?
Has Henny matched up with cost of living?
Well, with earnings and cost of living, maybe not. But look, let's look at the numbers.
How do you, okay, go on.
Let's look at the numbers. I think it's best to look at numbers.
Go on with the numbers.
If you look, the Office of National Statistics makes it very clear. The retail price index, inflation rate at the moment is about 2.5%. It's very, very low. And if you look at progression, one of the fastest way of wealth creation is property ownership. Margaret Thatcher came with the property owning democracy, and there was a proliferation of property ownership in the UK. And today, the fastest way in which a lot of people have made money is in their properties. The value of property has gone up 20–30% than it was 10 years ago. And people could remortgage that property, pull up monies, and go into business. Those are the numbers that indicate to you that standard of living has, in fact, increased, and the cost of living has dropped. Look at the cost of living. Inflation rate is low. So the cost of food is low compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. So the numbers...
in your view, people are living better with what they earn now than they will have lived some 5 years ago.
Look, economist tells you that your earning capacity and your earning ratio depends on the inflation, isn't it? If inflation is low, your spending power goes further. If inflation is high, your spending power goes shorter. Inflation is low, and earning has increased, and that gap is a wealth gap. It flies in the face of common sense for anyone to say our standard of living is worse than it was many years ago. It's ridiculous.
Let me take Akim. Akim, good morning. Thank you for joining us again. Hello, Akim.
Yeah, I'm listening to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Turn down the volume of your TV set, please.
My simple contribution is that I think the juxtaposition between private sector and public. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I said my simple contribution is that the juxtaposition between public and private is not very accurate because there is no private without public. Because every contract comes from the public sector. So therefore, we can argue that there's only one set of economy, which is public sector.
In your view, do you think, how would you assess the argument that the standard of living is better now because cost of living is cheaper?
So, but I would, in addition, what I would add is that by trying to use UK as an example of capitalism, you are only going to be punishing capitalism because there are various types of capitalism around the world. So the UK example is a very extreme form of capitalism. For instance, it is different to what is being practiced in German capitalism and likewise Japanese capitalism. By using UK as a yardstick of capitalism, it will look like capitalism is a bad system, which is not. I'm a full supporter of capitalism, but it has to be supported by a lot of social systems, which UK is not benefiting from right now, due to Margaret Thatcher reform, which has destroyed a lot, which has eroded a lot of UK social systems, and then which put us in the problem we are right now in the UK.
All right, Akim, thanks for your contribution on the program.
Sorry, can I just interject?
Thank you, Akim. Yeah, go on.
Interject with one thing, sort of, Goodman said. He said about property prices has gone up. Let's understand this. It's not the property price has gone up, it's the land price has gone up. We got to understand that. It's not the bricks and mortars, it's the land has gone up. So therefore, the price of the land has gone up, so therefore it escalates. So it's not property price, it's not bricks and mortars. So I just had to explain that.
I wanted to say, Godwin, look, if you say property prices have actually gone up, people say earn about the same thing they earned 2-3 years ago, but they pay more on rent. They pay more on rent. You're not rent increases almost every time. But people people's earning have not actually increased comparatively. So how would you say for instance, somebody who earns £1,500 per annum last year and was paying £900 on 2-bedroom flat last year, now earns £1,600 this year and now paying £1,300 on the same 2-bedroom flat?
Well, do you know what you're saying? You've given me an example of what does not exist. So I could also tell you the same thing. What do you think about
Are you saying the cost of rent is not increasing?
Well, look, your example is not realistic. That's what I'm saying.
Are you saying cost of rent is not going higher than earning?
Well, we're not sure.
What do you mean we're not sure?
Look, okay. The rent.
I live out there. You live out there. We all live out there.
I'm a property investment strategist.
You are for that one.
You've read my book.
Absolutely.
And my point is simply this: that although rent may have gone up,
yes,
wages has correspondingly increased, and so the proportion of the growth is about the same.
Let's look at some people in the public sector. When there has been a public sector cap, and now just recently opened up by just 1%, and inflation and whatever cost of living has gone up by 5% or by whatever percent it is.
That's right.
How could you say?
Absolutely.
God, and that is justified?
Well, look, I tell you simply. I tell you.
I'm just asking.
We go back to economics.
You're
Economics seems to have the answer.
You're in a better position to tell me.
Economics has the answer.
I'm just asking. You are a property consultant. Yes. I've had a cap on my pay. Yes.
Like nurses. The NHS.
Like nurses, like NHS, like people in public sector.
Right.
But there's no cap on.
All right,
what you will spend money on.
Let's extend
twice as hard, and they still can't afford to pay the rent.
You're quite right, but let's extend this conversation. When you look at rentals, okay, most of you concentrate on London. You're London-centric. It's dangerous. We have to look at the whole of the United Kingdom. If you go to places like Manchester or Birmingham or Burnley, the prices are reasonable. And when you come to places like London, the prices are relatively high, but there's London waiting that deals with your wages to deal with that corresponding increase in the cost of living. So on balance, it sort of it balances out, really. So one has to be careful when you're looking at cost of living, because you have to look at regional. In regional, on average, the cost of living has dropped. And that's the numbers coming out of the Office for National Statistics.
Well, I don't know about if you're comparing out of London to London. I should imagine it's the same principle. If the cost of living out of London is more or less the same as London, there's no difference. There's no comparison. London, yes, it's different, slightly costly, but it doesn't matter. It balances out. They still have the same issues we have. Rent prices are going out, even in Birmingham, Manchester, wherever it is. They still have the same issues like we have here. Back to London, let's concentrate the issues in London. If you look at sort of what nurses are coming, even teachers are saying that they can't live in London, yet the profession, all these professional people that we need to provide this public service can't afford to live in London. They've got to come out of London, and then they've got to commute in. So therefore, their standard of living has dropped. It hasn't increased. So how could you sit here and say to me, prosperity has risen, standard of living has risen, whereas the professional bodies themselves can't even live in London. So literally.
Okay, well, I'll answer it. Shall I answer it?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, well,
please,
look, you talk about teachers and doctors and nurses and all the rest of it. Well, with teachers, you have teachers in the private sector, teachers who teach in private schools. So you have to separate the different sections. And given that we're talking about the private-public sector debate, I'm not entirely sure. But on average, the numbers suggest that our standard of living is better and the cost of living has dropped. Those are the numbers. I can't change those numbers.
So you're going to stick to numbers, and that's it.
Well,
so
the numbers come from human beings. I mean, the Office of National Statistics, they've done the numbers, they've got the calculation, they've got the numbers. It's their department, and they've thrown the numbers at us.
From your own interaction with people around you, family, friends, associates,
sure,
you think they're better off?
I think some are better off, some are just where they are. On average, a lot of them are better off. I mean, I saw you 5 years ago. You look happier than You look happier than I've ever known.
Looks are deceiving. Looks could be very deceiving. Looks could be very deceiving. I mean,
You look so well.
looks could be so
But you
deceiving.
go to the parliament on every week. You hear, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn and the Prime Minister argue about the cost of living, people getting poorer, how expensive life is in generally in the UK, how services are dropping, how it's difficult to run and maintain the train, you miss your train, and the rest of things like that.
Well, the trains, I must admit, we have problems with the trains.
And of course, the problems with the NHS.
Well, we have problems. We're bound to have problems. But
And
the
the police.
And the problem with the police.
Well, look, you're bound to have problems. But the problems are
the
not
cost of
as-
rent going higher every day.
Well, let's deal with one at a time. Human being as we are, we're bound to have problems, okay? But having a problem does not mean the system is not working. It just means there's a problem to be fixed, all right? So the NHS, that's exactly what it is. Carillion was supposed to build the hospitals in Liverpool, which would have produced 685 additional beds. That's a good idea. It just so happened that it failed. Carillion failed, but the idea is good. Can you see? So those are the things we ought to be looking at.
But the
And that's
idea
my-
is good, but it's not for free.
What do you mean it's not for free?
Huge amount of government public money meant for that project. Now, we don't know.
Well, we're not sure. We're not sure what would happen to Liverpool's Hospital and Birmingham. But
Well, the government already said that they're going to take that over.
they'll
And
take
said-
it over. They
they
will.
said-
I could guarantee you they will take
said,
it over.
They said that they're finding out the way of funding it.
The other way they'll do, I'll tell you right now, is they will outsource it to someone who could do it better. So what you have in real terms is resources. If a company is not using resources, it goes to another company that could use it better.
Well, that's what it should do. The government should not give it all to this massive big organization. They should outsource it to different companies. So therefore, you have a better service, and also when you have a better service, you find that the cost of living, these workers would have a better wages.
I agree. So you're back to the private sector.
Yeah, but yes, again, to certain part of government contracts. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at national things like the NHS, the electricity board, the water company, they should be in the hands of the public sector. This is ours. This was given to us. I mean, water. I mean, how on earth are we paying this colossal sum of money for water? Water is ours. That's a natural thing that's given to us. And yet, we've got to pay the back of our teeth for water. Electricity, education, and health should be in the public domain.
And when it's in public...
Before I allow you to answer that, let's go on that short break. Sorry about that, guys. Let's go on this very short break, and we'll be back talking about things that should be in the public domain to make life easier and better for people, but are now in the hands of the private sector. And I'm sure Gordon has an answer for that.
Here, live on Ben Television. Can it be difficult? Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on Ben Television.
All right, thank you so much for joining us as we're on the last segment of this program before we return to our newsroom to finish the program for this beautiful Monday morning. We've been having an interesting conversation here today with my guest, Gordon Okro, property investment strategist, and of course, Ashburn Older, who has been looking at the benefit of services being run at the public level, and Gordon, who believes that services are more efficient, better run when they are in the hands of private companies. Before we went on that short break, he raised he said, look, there are certain services that should be in the hands of the public sector, but are now in the hands of the private sector. And some of those services are for the benefits, are socialist services, but once they are in the hands of private sector, they become a profit-oriented service, and then they tend to be for the benefit of the shareholders. Take, for instance, Carillion. Look at what the directors earned. They know the company was going bust, and they were earning huge amount of money.
Well, yeah, look, Keith Cochrane, who is the interim chief executive of Carillion, is said to earn about £750,000 up until June of this year. It's a massive amount of money, I accept that. And I think the government is wrong. They need to look at that. So the question we ought to be asking ourselves is, how do we ensure that this does not recur? The Carillion...
But isn't that the hallmark of a private company? Profits?
Well, no.
Benefit to shareholders?
No. What the government should do is they allocate... Well, remember, we're talking about the allocation of public sector work to the private sector. So when you're allocating using the procurement rules, what the government ought to do is to say, all right, we're going to allocate this to the best tendered company, but we're going to peg the salary you pay to your chief executive to civil servant rate of maybe, 195, 200,000 max, no more than, and just peg it. The danger you have is you won't get the best brain coming there, because you need the best brain to come and run these companies. And for you to win the best brain, they're activated by wages. So I'm afraid we're back to square one. That is not the reason why these companies are failing. The reason is because we ought to look at monitoring.
If this is about the best brain, and this best brain that are paying huge amount of money running a failing company, what is best in their brain?
Well, then there should be...
for instance, Carillion. Who should we hold responsible for the failure of Carillion?
Well, Carillion, the government who allocates the contract, the chief executive who failed to see the problems, because in June last year there was a black hole of 850 million when they gave their report last year, and the audit office identified it, and they ought to have seen that there was problems with the company, and they didn't identify that. So the chief executive and the government and the shareholders, because the shareholders were being paid 4%, which is 2% more than its competitors. So these three people, and the banks who were throwing money at Carillion, they knew that Carillion had problems and were still giving credit facilities. All of these bodies ought to look at themselves again and ensure this does not recur. But I still go back to the point. The fact that Carillion failed is not an ideological failure of privatization. It is not. It's just that a company failed.
Ashby, can I just come back to the point where he said that you need the best brains to run this multi-organization, and if we don't pay the sort of cholesterol sort of money we pay, you will not get the best brains. I disagree with that totally and utterly. So we had the best brains, but yet this company went into liquidation. Coming to this liquidation of this, well, not into liquidation, it's in the crisis it's in at the minute. The problem that we face right now is how we're going to bail out, who's going to bail out this company so that we can get the services back and running or stop.
It's going into liquidation. The company is dead. It's going into liquidation.
Yes, so government is not throwing...
They're not throwing money
to help them revive.
Right. So is the government going to pick up the tab for that sort of, for the collapse of this company? Or are we going to need the taxpayers' money to do that? That's one thing I've got concerns about. I think the government should not do that. I think this company, as you rightly said, the shareholders, the banks, and all these people should take the cost of all this, and the contract should be taken out, and the contract should be spread out to small companies right across the United Kingdom that can provide the service that we need. But coming back to what you said about the point that the best brains are needed, we've got to pay the best brains, that is absolutely nonsense. Because we had the best brains, it didn't work, and if that's the so-called...
Can the civil service attract the best brain? Are we saying there are no best brain in the civil service?
But we have got it. We had it. We had all the best brains good. These companies was doing well, and we sold it off. So if we sold all these companies off...
Was not doing well before it was sold?
Sorry, was what?
NIPOST.
Well, look, doing well, efficiency is what we're looking at. And the public services... throughout history have failed in carrying out certain...
I'm sorry about the earlier on use of language. Look at the postal service. Was it not doing well before it was sold?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, look, the postal services...
BT.
Postal services was, I would argue, was not really. The post, you wait for your post for many for days.
Wasn't do well, but just make it.
And now, in the private sector, you get your post. You get it regularly. If you're posting second class, it's second class rate. If you're posting first class, you get it next day. The private services do private work because they know that in competition, if they don't, they'll be cleaned out and someone else will take their place. That's what competition brings in the private sector. The public service is monopolistic and there's no competition, and standards start to drop because there's no competition. Brings the best out of you. If you know someone is competing for your job, you increase your efficiency. So competition increases efficiency. That's why the private sector has an advantage over the public sector.
Let's round this up. Ashman.
That's a fair comment in what he said. It's true. But at the end of the day, do we have a company that provides the service for the people, by the people, or do we have a company that provides the service for the rich? The rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer. We can't have this inequality. If we have a business, it's got to cater for everybody, so we all have a fair slice of the cake, not for the rich getting richer. This is not acceptable. We cannot have poverty at the level we have now. We cannot have homeless people at the level where we cannot have people who like.
It's a life is getting better.
Absolutely not. For some people, yes. For the rich, not the poor. Simple as that, really.
All right, guys. It's been a pleasure having you on the program today. Godwin Okri is a property investment strategist. He's involved in advising people on property investment, and in 2016 you won a CA award.
I did, yes.
Fiction.
Yes, for my book, Investing in Properties, yes.
Investment properties. So he's been doing very well for himself in property. So he doesn't have an idea there's poverty.
I'm not sure.
He's taking up the prices of houses, you see. penalizing
of course, if you want to
the poor nurses and
the poor. Make the best out of your investment on property or whatever, the best advice, I think, I'm not selling him. Godwin Okri, property investment strategist, could be your best bet, having won an award in some of these areas. And of course, Ashburn Older. Ashburn is a politician, parliamentary candidate for the Lib Dem. He's been doing very well. He's also an activist. He's been campaigning on behalf of the community. Ashburn, thank you for joining us and for your time with us on the show today. Godwin, thank you for taking your busy time to join us on the show today.
Thank you.
Let's go on to our newsroom now as we round off the segment of Dialogue in Diaspora this Monday morning. We conclude with our news, and I'll see you again on Tuesday tomorrow at 7 p.m. with News Punch as we bring you another wonderful episode of our Current Affairs show. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging, sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere. To keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on Bentham Vision.